Hi, I'm Paula Goyanes, and I work as a full-stack software engineer at LaunchDarkly. And I'm passionate about technology, I'm passionate about inclusion, and accessibility is at the intersection of that. So I want to give you this talk to get you excited about accessibility and to show you all the basics. Let's start with some definitions, right? What is accessibility? So web accessibility, it's really just about building with empathy and creating websites that can be used by anyone and everyone, regardless of limitations or disabilities. And inclusion is about welcoming all people. And your product is inclusive when it is usable by the widest range of people, right? And that's included but not limited to people with disabilities. So this is a key component in a more inclusive web. But who is this for? Definitely the 15% of the world's population living with a disability. That is 1 billion people, y'all. And in the US, it's 26% of adults. These stats actually apply often to long-term disabilities for insurance and welfare systems, so they discount other limitations. We're also looking at people with temporary limitations. You went to the eye doctor, you got your pupils dilated, maybe you broke an arm. People with situational limitations. Right now I'm in Florida, it's really bright here, and there's like a ton of glare from the sun on my screen. Or maybe you're holding a baby in one arm. But who else does this benefit? Okay, well, English is my second language, but I still speak it fluently, and yet when I'm watching British television, I have to have subtitles. Subtitles, voice commands, those are all accessibility features that we might all use. And that's the first big takeaway. Accessibility benefits everyone. So much of our communication and our interaction with the world, right, is happening virtually. And when we empower as many diverse voices as possible, we're all benefiting. Not just that, but accessible practices are often going to just make your site more usable for everyone. Let me show you an example of this. So I coded up this site for wellmeaning.io. Okay, no shade. This year is tough, and wellmeaning.io is trying their hardest. And from a visual standpoint, the site is beautiful, but there are some accessibility issues. I'm going to show you how to spot more of these shortly. But for now, you might already be perceiving some of them. For example, this navigation bar at the top is difficult to read. I can barely read that sign in against the yellow. And for someone sighted, this might be annoying, but for somebody with low vision, this is unusable. And this may look familiar because I've seen this exact pattern out in the wild, and I coded up this website as an amalgamation of a lot of tech company home pages. Only 30% of websites are accessible. There's a focus on visual beauty, so these mistakes are happening, they're out in the wild. But how do we spot all of the issues, right? And how do we know how to fix them? There's a document for this. WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are the standard. They cover a wide range of recommendations for making web content more accessible. And it's better to follow guidelines when we fix these issues so that we're doing so consistently with established patterns and users know what to expect. I won't go into these details, but it's got a success criteria for different levels of conformance. Basically, there's A to AAA, and the more A's, the more strict. So here's an example really relevant to wellmeaning.io for a success criteria to make sure that this text is readable. Text must have a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. Okay, so now that I know this, let's go ahead and try to implement this on Wellmeaning. So here I am on the site, and I can see some of the accessibility issues, maybe not all of them. Spoiler, actually most of this text, if not all of it, is inaccessible. But I'm going to use an automated tool to help me catch some of the things that I might not have noticed. Here I've got the developer Chrome tools open. I am on this Lighthouse tab. Lighthouse is awesome. It lets you run several kinds of audits and reports. I've chosen to run an accessibility report. Now, this isn't going to catch everything. As a matter of fact, give us a pretty good score. Here we got a score of 95. And what it's going to tell me is that I have a contrast problem with a button. So my background and foreground colors do not have that 4.5 to 1 ratio. And my failing element is a button. It's even going to highlight the element which is really helpful. And it's funny because this isn't necessarily the element that sighted users might have caught, which is why it's so good to manually test as well as automated test. Now, I know what the issue is, but how bad is it? What do I do? I recommend this awesome tool from WebAIM, the color contrast checker. I know the hex code of this button, background color, and I know that the text is white. I've plugged in these two values, and I've been told now what the contrast ratio is, and it is 2.08. That's worse than I would have even thought, and we are failing across the board. Okay, but what if this is kind of close to your brand color? Like, how do you do? What do you use instead? There's another great tool for this, the accessible color generator, and all of these are free. You can plug in a hex code. Again, I'm plugging in this hex code for my background color against white, and it will recommend to you the nearest color that will be accessible. Awesome. So now that I've been able to use these tools, let's go ahead and improve our website. Ooh. On the left, I've got wellmeaning.io before. On the right, I've got an after. We've gone from a 95 to 100 accessibility score, and it didn't take anything away. This looks just as good, if not better, and is more readable regardless of disability. And this is another key takeaway. Accessible design is good design. A design won't be beautiful to someone who can't perceive it. I really think that the best design can be appreciated by all. And so far, we've been focusing on perceiving that design visually. But there are other ways people perceive content on the web. And oftentimes, this is with assistive technology. So let me tell you a little bit about that. Using assistive technology, a very common assistive technology is screen readers. What they do is that they read web content and images out as text. Who's using them? People who are blind, who have literacy limitations, people who like British people reading things out to them. Accessibility is for everybody. And if you're using a Mac computer, you have access to a screen reader. I really urge you to try this. Press that home button 3 times. And you can choose to enable voiceover and use that screen reader. Now, if you're on a different OS, there are downloadable solutions like JAWS, or go old school. I have done this. Have a friend read the HTML and text out to you. And so this is how you can make an image perceivable to a screen reader. Here, I've got this image of a pig, and in this code snippet, I've coded up this image, and I've added an alt text. Now, if you've ever heard anything about accessibility, chances are the thing that you heard about was alt text. And this alt text is what is going to be read out by the screen reader. Or this is another accessibility issue. In the case that my internet connection is too slow and the image doesn't load, this is what I'm going to see instead. And so this is what it would sound like when the screen reader reads it.
Piglet working image.
And you've heard me say here the word perceivable a lot. And that's actually because it is one of the 4 principles of accessibility based off of that WCAG guideline. We've got perceivable. The information has to be discernible. Operable. Users need to be able to interact with your content. Understandable. They need to understand the information you're trying to tell them so that they can act on it. And robust. Make sure that your HTML isn't breaking, that your content is well supported across user agents. So let's explore these other principles a bit more, starting with operable. Okay. So here I've got a button example. Now, a lot of us, right, are working in tech, and we don't want to use our mouse. I don't want to leave my home row. I don't want to leave my keyboard because accessibility is for everyone. But some people don't even have the option to use a mouse. So it's important to use HTML that will allow us to navigate, operate content using just a keyboard or with whatever assistive technology. And a great way to do this is by using semantic HTML, built-in HTML. Let me illustrate. We have these 2 buttons. On the left, I've got a real button. It is a button HTML element. On the right, I've got a poser button. It is a div. And so I'm missing out on a lot of the cool functionality that I get from having a button. There's no real inherent meaning in a div. So let me show you everything that I need to do in order to make that div do what a button comes with for free. So here I can tab into this button. I just clicked the tab key and was able to, get into it. In order to do that with a div, I need to have this tab index value. That's very unfortunate because otherwise this is unreachable to me via the keyboard. And something that we have on a button is a click handler, what to do when the person actually clicks on the button. Now, automatically, that click handler on a button is going to fire when you press an enter key or a space key. Unfortunately, that synthetic click activation, which is what it's called, doesn't happen for a div. So I need to add a key press handler as well. And if I want to be able to interact with it via my keyboard. And then I need to know the key code for enter, which is 13. So on the right here, I've got this function to handle that key press. Things have gone downhill when you're looking at that key code now. And so we want to be able to actually leverage all of these great built-ins. And this is not a contrived example. I've actually seen this out in the wild quite a bit because people don't like the way that buttons are styled by default, and they want that clean slate, right? That is a div, but that's too much focus on that visual beauty. So I'm going to show you some other really cool things that you can do with semantic HTML. Here I have this form. That's a semantic input. And similarly, I get a lot of really cool functionality. I am able to move through this form by tabbing. And here I am in this password field. Now, if we look over to the left in the code, this is an input element of type password. That gives me a lot of cool built-ins, like when I type into it, I see that ... that is obscuring what I'm writing. I can say that it is required. I can give a minimum length. And because of that, when I tab away from this, I'm getting a validation error. Now, I didn't have to code any of this. I didn't have to write up that validation text myself. This was the validation message property of this HTML element that's giving me this information. You can also use the validity state API to give us properties on the validity of our form elements. This is awesome. It's really well supported for the most part, Internet Explorer. And it gives us all kinds of properties on the validity of our form elements. And I was able to hook into these features to decide when and how to surface these messages. So another cool input here is this number input. Now, this is really awesome. I am able to tell this number input the minimum, the maximum, and the step, right? That's how much I want to increment and decrement. So just using my up and down arrow keys, I can increase this by 2 because that's what I said I wanted my step to be. Now, a quick Easter egg. Okay, when I get that error message up here, if y'all have really amazing color vision, you may have noticed that the border looks a bit different. I'm going to show you something cool. So Command-Shift-P in my developer tools is going to bring up this menu, and I'm going to click on Show Rendering. Now, rendering is going to allow me to do a lot of really cool stuff with emulation, and I actually develop with this on. So right now, I am emulating vision deficiencies, red-green color, like complete red-green color blindness. Let me go ahead and turn that off. Oh, that is way different. Did you see that now turn red? Yeah, that's because that's what that was looking like for somebody with red-green color blindness. This is why it is so important to not rely on color to relay information to our users. We want to make sure that everything is understandable. So we've seen how using the web's built-in accessibility features can benefit us as developers. I like to say that the web is accessible by default, which is another key point. Not being accessible is a bug. I think we need to have a paradigm shift from we have to make this page accessible to let's not break the inherent accessible behavior while building this site. Accessibility is most easily done early on. So let's always remember, not being accessible, that is a bug. And so if not being accessible is a bug, how do we prevent bugs? Design. Accessibility begins at the very top with design. Code linters can help you catch errors before they happen. If you're writing JSX, I recommend the ESLint plugin. Automated tools like the Chrome Lighthouse Accessibility Audit or Pally has an integration with Cypress for end-to-end testing. And human beings, you want to design with people with disabilities, not just for people with disabilities. When you design without people with disabilities, what you're doing is you're coding for these automated tools, and it's not the same. They don't catch everything. These people are going to do this work inevitably, and they shouldn't have to be doing it for free, right? You're designing, you're coding for humans. But really, to prevent bugs, we need to remember accessibility is everyone's job. I think we're able to understand this pretty well with security. Bugs are best prevented when everybody is involved. And similarly, everyone should understand the UX impacts of accessibility. Now, I understand that that's an investment, so what about making the case? Well, this is the case for accessibility. If your site is accessible, you'll have more users, right? A greater number of people can use your product. You'll have more self-reliant users. There's less burden on support, a more efficient self-serve funnel, happy users that aren't going to drag you on Twitter. All of these improvements, they seem like luxuries until someone you desperately want, or who desperately wants to be successful with your site, runs into trouble. And that person could be an investor. And also because of lawsuits. The number of accessibility-related lawsuits jumped a lot from 2017 to 2018, 177%. They have plateaued since. But obviously, all of these reasons pale in comparison to the major reason to be accessible. Accessibility is the right thing to do. It is a kind thing to do. The internet is the way that so many people interact with society, and enabling people with disabilities is a social responsibility. And there's a ton of resources to be able to do this out there for free. I will post this. There's a ton of these great resources. We saw a lot of these in action today. And with that, I want to say thank you. If you have any questions, you can find me on Twitter. I'm not super active, but I will be. And you can also email me at goyanespaula@gmail.com. Thank you so much.